I was hurt, torn asunder, had my hopes and dreams dragged out into the light before me, and stabbed with the proverbial sword of Damocles. I saw ambition wither and die, and optimism locked behind a jail of despair and pessimism. From some of your god-awful Xenoblade 2 takes, so as a palate cleanser, to detox myself from the virulent poisons and concoctions of your own design, I had to take a step back, ponder my surroundings, and delve back into an old foe. Xenoblade Chronicles 1 hot takes. I was down, but I ain't hear no bell. And upon investigating these hot takes, I felt a choir of angels hold their breath, and then in a torrential exclamation, they cried out over the verdant horizon, "Hallelujah!" Maybe there was still hope in the world. Maybe humanity had a chance to strive for something greater, something heaven-sword. For upon my, what word to use, investigations, I felt the fires of ambition and optimism reignite in a celestial thunderstorm of epic proportions. I felt my very soul go Super Saiyan Blue, and my heart began to cry out that there is a God. For you all had some incredibly great takes on Xenoblade Chronicles 1. A refuge to nurse my malignant wounds, with a gentle salve to disinfect the wounds and to fade away the scars of what I had endured. And without further ado, allow us to dive headfirst, like Shulk and Fiora diving down to the Mechonis hand, into some of these Xenoblade Chronicles 1 hot takes that my community gave me to react to. Let's do it. We begin with Cringe, whose take is not cringe. I know, I was shocked too. False advertisement at its finest hour. Agil is a top 3 Xenoblade antagonist, up there with Malos and N. Okay, replace Malos with Jin and then we're cooking. But I do agree Agil is one of my favorite antagonists in Xenoblade Chronicles. And sure, he may not get as much time in the proverbial sun as, say, Malos, Jin, or N, who are in their respective stories and had more screen time comparatively than Agil, but to me, Agil, and I talked about this before, Agil is kind of like the blueprint for how Monolith would construct its antagonists later on, or at least the central key ones that would be in our face for most of the time, to where we absolutely despised this character. We understood that we had to defeat them because their goal was in direct contradiction to the perseverance of the human condition. We understood that. We understood that they were in the wrong, but we could understand how they arrived from point A to point B. And I feel a lot of the times people mix up a sympathetic villain with being a villain that has good motivation. We can sympathize with them, we can understand how they arrived at the worldview and the conclusion that they arrived at, but we can still fundamentally disagree and say you are in the wrong, you are the villain in this scenario. And that to me, Agil is on that path because he shows us what would have happened to Shulk had the events of Xenoblade 1 and the people surrounding Shulk not exist or not pull their weight in regards to keeping Shulk mentally and emotionally propped up over the course and tragedies he incurred during the events of Xenoblade 1. And I also think Agil goes to show that rehabilitation is a noble endeavor and that it can succeed. You just have to be able to understand and relate to the person, and be able to open up to them and try and find some kind of resolution to the qualms and unravel a very deep and complex emotional package that may be a specific character. Does that mean Agil deserved justification or absolvement for the sins that he committed? Absolutely not. But it does show that people can change. People can actively choose, sometimes with a little bit of help, to take a step in the right direction. And to borrow a quote from God of War Ragnarok, choose to be better. Not because you can absolve, this is my own, not because you can absolve all the sins of your past, but so that you can be a better person from here on out. So Cringe, I think you may need a new username, because that take was not cringe whatsoever. And now we have a take that some may disagree with. However, I'm not entirely opposed to it. I think it's a pretty interesting idea. We have Xeno-based here, who lays it on the table with Fiora. Despite her lack of character relevance to the plot, to this day, still has the most charming and charismatic personality of the entire party. Were Fiora the MC instead of Shulk, Xenoblade Chronicles 1 might be my favorite game of the trilogy. Girl rolled a nat 20 Riz check, and the DM decided to bench her. Now, I do think, as a possible alternate story, this would be very interesting to see how this entire narrative could have unraveled. Like, say, maybe Fiora watched Mumcar kill Shulk in front of her, but then Fiora was captured and turned into a faced Mechon, and then together with Maineth had to go along the same emotional journey that Shulk ended up going, break out of the chains of domination from the Mechonis and Agil, come back over to the side of the Bionis and the Homs, convince them, hey, I'm working with you, I'm not with these Mechon and Agil and their plans of Hom's eradication. Let's work together to forge a better tomorrow. I think there's a legitimately amazing game to be had with that story. And I think they may have even realized this as well, which is why we played as Kevis and Agnes soldiers in Xenoblade 3, and not soldiers from the city. Because they could have easily done something like that, where instead of having the main party come from the Kevis and Agnes troops, they could have had us just be 6 people from the city, and go out into this world brought to the edge of annihilation from stagnation and war. But they didn't. They had people from the middle of those conflicts come around and say, hey, now let's go do this. I think I would really enjoy seeing a what-if story based on this idea. I think there's a lot of value in the story that we did get, especially with the parallel between Shulk and Agil, and we'll touch upon that in a later take, but I would not have been opposed to something like this. Now for one that may be a little bit controversial. Shall Be Purified comes to the table with, I know a lot of people didn't like the love triangle, and I admit it wasn't the best handled part of the story. But personally, it had a positive impact on me seeing how Melia struggles and develops beyond that love triangle. I've had difficulty dealing with a similar situation in the past multiple times, and having a character I admire also experience that and grows beyond it was inspirational, and it helped me move past my unrequited love. And for that reason, Melia will forever be my comfort character. She means a lot to me, and this to me kind of touches upon a very important aspect of storytelling, and that is, regardless of how you view the quality of a character's story writing, more often than not, and almost with 100% certainty, the reaction a character gets by an audience member or a consumer or a viewer will depend upon how that person relates to said character, what has shaped them in their life over the course of their own journey to react to a certain character or a certain character's story. And while personally I may not be a big fan of the love triangle, this is one of the important aspects of a storyline, because it doesn't have to affect me personally, but it can affect others in a positive way. And that's one of the powerful things about storytelling to begin with. It allows us to shine a light on various aspects of our own well-being, of our own personality, or our own baggage, for lack of a better word. Not necessarily baggage, but just part of our own story and personality, and viewed from a different perspective. Because sometimes that's all we need to properly untangle something that we were unsure about or we didn't even realize about ourselves. That is one of the powerful things about storytelling. So I absolutely see this side of the argument when it comes to Melia's unrequited love story. Now, we're gonna go from that very serious topic to talking about Nopon, because obviously, have you ever watched my content before? We move on to Soft Noob Girl, who brings up Riki is one of the best characters. He's a way better and more interesting character than Shala. Now, shade to Shala aside, Riki is a character that for me, when I first played Xenoblade 1, I was kind of here or there with. He didn't really have an arc of his own, it was just kind of there for the vibes. But I don't think he ever detracted from the scene either. He was an interesting sense of comedic relief into a story that can be rather dark and twisted at times. He was able to bring a bit of an interesting perspective. And I especially came around to this idea and grew to be rather fond of him as a character upon my second playthrough of Xenoblade 1. Again, I'm a firm believer that not every character needs to have equal screen time to have an engaging story or even have an entire character arc surrounding them to be a well-received and valuable part of the main cast, and Riki is one of the examples of that, in my opinion. He's able to bring a little bit of a charm of lightheartedness into a scene when it very much calls for it just to break up the flow of things. He's also able to bring a bit of wisdom that you may not expect to come from him, such as on the Makana's hand when he says, hey look, I'm very tired, I'm very hungry, why don't we just take a stop and rest for a bit? And he didn't do that because of his own selfish interest. He knew and realized, hey, Melia's not holding up all that well right now, but she's too proud of herself to bring it up herself, so I'll take the fall for it, I'll take the blame here, so that she's able to rest. It's a very wholesome scene, and Riki overall is just a very wholesome character that adds a lot to the story, in my opinion. And I don't believe that Xenoblade 1 would be the same without Riki. And I think one of my favorite aspects of Riki as a character is the scenes he's not even in, like in Future Connected, where we hear more about him and his character from his children, Kino and Nene, and the stories they share about Riki and how he is as a father. I think he's a very valuable contribution to the cast. We have Max here who says, the game suffers from a heavy reliance on Shulk from both a story and gameplay perspective. He's almost mandatory in your party if you're fighting a Mechon or Telethia before post-game, and every other main character fails to be relevant during major portions of the story, because 90% of it needs to have something to do with Shulk or the Monado. So I agree and I don't with some of this. You don't need Shulk in your party if you have access to relevant anti-Mechon weaponry in your party. You can get by. However, it's just way easier with Shulk because he's very flexible in what he brings to the table, because he's kind of a support character in a lot of ways. He can dish out a lot of damage, don't get me wrong, but he can also be a pretty dang good support. Like, you can get by without him, but I also don't think that's necessarily an argument against this point, where it is significantly easier, at least on a first playthrough, to have Shulk in the party. And before people bring up you have to be able to control him to use Monado Watts effectively, you don't. Actually, I'm pretty sure if you want to use them efficiently as possible, you're not supposed to control Shulk. All you gotta do is walk up to him whenever it calls for a Monado Watt, and he has access to it immediately without a cooldown. I'm pretty sure that's how that works. That's why I always mained as Melia. You take off that one Talonot that deals himself damage for some freaking reason, you just remove that you never use anyways. Control Melia whenever you need a Monado Watt, just walk up to the jabroni, click him, and he'll use the right one. Job done. Now, when it comes to the story as well, I think it comes down to the style of story that is being told, and how not every main character needs to have an entire character arc surrounding them that go throughout the entirety of the main story. A lot of the story and development from Xenoblade 1 goes down to 3 characters specifically: Shulk, Melia, and Fiora. Those are the main 3 that get significant screen time. They're not the only ones, but they get a lot of it. And I think it was an aspect of the storytelling that he was trying to do with Xenoblade 1 and 2 to a degree as well. It's like, okay, what if we put a lot of development in this one singular character, or this little like micro group of characters, and have that characterization spread out and kind of like trickle down to the other characters as well, who may have stories that don't need to have a lot of time in the sun to be interesting characters of their own right, like Riki. I think Charlotte got a lot of time in the sun as well, and I liked Rhine's story that was there as well. I would have liked a little bit more, but I did like what was there for Rhine. I don't think he needed that much more. Same thing when it comes to Dunban. I would have liked some more in the back end for Dunban, but the story that we got with him was sufficient for me in terms of having an engaging character arc that makes me care about the character. I think it's just one of the story styles that Xenoblade 1 employs that may not resonate with everyone. We have Atlas coming in with, you can have a Rhine bow without Rhine, and Rhine isn't a lifesaver, and this, to me, this one's the most abominable take of the entire video. I mean, come on, people! Trying to hurt my soul over here. But notice, they talked about the other memes Rhine had, but not that one. But why? Because we all know it's Rhine time, baby. We have Luke coming in with, affinity is cool in theory only. It builds up unbearably slowly, and the inability to carry it over onto a New Game Plus means that to see the heart-to-hearts, you're going to have to do a lot of needless grinding and praying that you can hit B at the exact moment. Also, while I'm at it, the B prompt is random and distracting. Either give me a consistent basis for button prompts or cast it out entirely. I do kind of agree. I think this is one of the flaws of Xenoblade 1's gameplay direction as a whole, where they spent most of the time making sure that the main story was as interesting and fun as possible, and relied a lot on very basic and generic side questing and grinding to kind of pad out the time. Like 99% of the cinematography in this game goes to the main story. Most of the side quests and even heart-to-hearts don't have VO or much of a use of cinematography outside of a few like generic camera angles. And it's just kind of there to expand the world if you like to read, but it's mainly there to up that playtime and to give you things to do. And I think they realize, hey, we have a cool thing going on with affinity here. However, does it translate perfectly over from the philosophy of behind the idea that we're trying to instill here versus the reception by the player? Because it is very slow and grindy and breaks up the pacing a lot. And you have to do very repetitious and monotonous activities to grind up affinity to a decent degree so that you can experience a lot of those heart-to-hearts that kind of flesh out certain character dynamics and backstories. Is that something we really want to do? Well, maybe there's a better way to go about doing this. Hence Xenoblade 2 and 3, but not before they lean into the idea with X. And we kind of go to a very similar idea here with Alistar's final take, who says, I don't think it's quite an abominable take, but rebuilding Colony 6 honestly sucks. I hate being told to get a bunch of resources, but not being able to find them. I'm glad Xenoblade 3 added waypoints for collectibles. Now, here's my thing with Colony 6. That is a perfect example of what I'm talking about when it comes to this exists as a type of content just to pad out your experience, and to pad out the time that you're playing in this game. It's cool seeing that progression, but a lot of the time, Black Liver Beans is asking you to go farm things that have a very low percent chance to drop or to spawn, where the activities you are doing aren't necessarily or entirely endearing or engaging or up to the quality of the standard of the rest of the main story of the game. It's grinding the pace to an arbitrary halt so that you can just redo a repetitious, monotonous task over and over again to increase that game time as a way to justify your purchase. Whereas in my opinion, the main story was strong enough. And I think this is why we see them try so many different tactics when it comes to side content in the other Xenoblade games, because they understood, hey, we really are not going to grow as a franchise all that much if we continue this style of side questing or side content in the future games. Let's try other things. Let's try Blade Quest. Let's try side quests that have more cinematography or more story behind them. Let's try Hero Quest. Let's try all these other things. And I think that worked out well for them. So I'm gonna call the video there for the day. I have cleansed my palate and I am ready next time to extend an olive branch. For you have all given me some god-awful takes. I think it's time for me to reveal my hottest take about Xenoblade. I don't know if you're all ready for it. This take, there's a possibility I may lose some people on this take. It's boiling hot. You see, and the worst part is, I don't even know if a good answer for the take. A good, rationale or reason for the take. But it's a take that I kind of have nonetheless. And we'll talk about it in a few days' time. So if you're excited for that and the eventual part 2 to the Xenoblade 2 hot takes, oh yes, I'll be going back into the deep end with those, don't you worry. Look, I have to defend Jin, I have to. Some of you have god-awful takes about him, I gotta fix him, yeah? Teacher Jmulls, coming in clutch, classes in session, bust out your notebooks. So I'm gonna call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you liked it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content. And hit the bell icon to be notified for when I upload these future videos and for when I stream in the future. Stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye bye everybody, until we meet again.